Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing? And I truly do mean you. Yes, how are you doing? How is your podcast doing? I am Chris of the world-famous Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find out all about that show if you decide to look it up at chrisandchristineshow.com. And yes, I will put a link to that into the show notes of today's episode. You know, speaking of show notes, I know that some podcasters may not know this, but yeah, you can put links to things in your show notes. And I highly recommend that every single person that creates a podcast at least put your website or maybe some contact information or maybe even social media. Yeah, I know you're on social media. Most of us are on social media. Put links to your social media into your show notes of your podcast episode. And that way, when your listener is listening to your show right now, they're like, hey, well, check that out. What did you mention about your website? What was this thing you're talking about? Let me look into the show notes, and you have a link to it. Makes it super convenient and very easy for the listener to just click on through, because not everybody remembers this stuff. I mean, I forget things super easily, like all the time. So if there's a written down link that makes it super easy for me to just click on it, oh, it's so amazing. Make things very, very convenient and easy for your audience to check you out and check out your stuff, really, because think about it. They do come to your show for your content, whatever it could possibly be, but they also come to you. You are the common denominator for every single episode that you play across your feed. Now, as I am recording this episode right now, it is currently 2:16 a.m. in the morning on Friday. And the reason why I'm up here super late or early, however you decide to look at it, recording this episode is because I am leaving town this weekend. So I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to get an episode out, I'm going to do it right now when I got like a window of time, a very late window of time to get stuff done before I catch a flight leaving town Friday. So I'll be out of town Friday till Tuesday or Monday or whatever. I'll be gone. But in the meantime, I am here creating this podcast for you. I enjoy podcasting. I love audio. I love the audio format. I love talking to all kinds of podcasting experts about podcasting. I love helping people out with their podcast. In fact, if you have any questions or you need help with your show, I'm always here to help you. I've created a coaching class. It's called Coaching with Chris, and I can send you a link. In fact, the link will be in the show notes today. I love putting links in show notes. So the link to that will also be in these show notes today. If you want to book a session with me, you can totally do that. It's right on there. I'm here to help you any way I can. So earlier yesterday, as I record this, I had a chance to talk to Elsie Escobar of Libsyn. She also is from the She podcast, and she does the Libsyn The Feed podcast. In fact, her official title over at Libsyn is Director of Community and Content. So she's kind of a Libsyn big deal, big shot over there at Libsyn. In fact, I've been listening to her show for a very long time, and she is so wonderful that she actually came over here to my podcast, and we talked all about podcasting and answered all kinds of questions we had about podcasting and advice for new podcasts. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Elsie Escobar. The one, the only Elsie Escobar of She Podcasts, Libsyn, The Feed, podcast extraordinaire. How you doing today, Elsie?
Oh, I'm doing well. I wish we need to have like a sound, like here I am. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, I didn't load any clips into the session. I should have done that. I didn't think about that.
Just kidding.
I don't use a ton of sound effects on this show, just a little bit, but you know shows that like constantly flood their show with sound effects. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of a no, especially like, you know what? There's like that one sound, the one that's like not a cowbell, but like I don't even know. I can't even make the sound. It really bothers me. It bothers me so much because it loses its meaning to me. You know?
Well, if you're using it for every little phrase,
Yes.
or is it the air horn that's super annoying?
I think that's what it is. Yeah.
It's horrible.
It's
Yeah.
horrible.
I think the Rodecaster has that built into it. I haven't played much. I know you have a Rodecaster also. You have the Gen 1 version, right?
Yes, I do.
Now, are
yes,
you
I
thinking
do.
about upgrading, or are you just going to stay where you're at?
I think I'm going to stay where I am right now because everything is still working as it should. And I have no reason to move. I think that if I were recording a lot more in terms of audio, doing like more consistently a show that I was in charge of, I would probably level up. But since I'm not, I'm using it more as an audio interface.
Well,
Versus with everything else, you know?
So everything kind of goes through it to the
Yeah.
computer, and then you just save it on the computer or whatever you use, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not using it for anything else. And then usually now I am in a position where I have someone else editing my shows. And
What
so
is that like?
I know it's so great. At first I was like, what? You know, for years I was like, no way. I must touch all my audio.
It's your baby, you know?
It's
like
my
your-
baby. Yeah, I would not let it go and all this stuff. But then now I have so many things going on that there's just like I was starting to feel the whole like, oh my God, do I have to edit the show? And I realized, okay, it's time for me to let it go. And mind you, I'm all right, but I'm not a podcast editor. I'm not that. And so because of that, I've been doing a lot more recording straight into the computer, and I just have to send my clean file to them.
Oh, fan. Now, do you
And-
save it as a wave or?
I save it as a wave. Yeah.
Okay. Do
And
you have to
then-
use like a Dropbox or something for that? Because it's a big file.
It is a big file. We usually use WeTransfer is my preferred form of sharing the stuff because I have Dropbox. I don't like the whole like uploading from the thing into a shared folder. And like, I think sometimes it gets in the way for me. And
Okay.
so I prefer going to WeTransfer.com and I will just send those files directly.
What is the cost for a WeTransfer? Do you know?
It's free.
Get out of here.
It's free. Come on now. You got to go check it out. They're so good. Super simple. You can only send, I believe, 3 gigabytes
At one time or total?
at one time.
But is it unlimited, like a limited storage or space, or just only
It
for
is,
transferring?
You're just transferring whatever you want. You can only transfer 3 gigabytes of at once, like at one time, right? But and they keep it if you're not paying for it. The transfer of that file, I believe it stays up there. I don't know, for like 48 hours or something, or more than that, or
okay.
72 hours. So that whoever receives it has to download it to their end,
And
right?
then after that, it disappears like an old
And then it
Snapchat back in the day?
disappears. Yeah. But what I like about it is that you don't even have to have an account. So
What?
you can just go in there and just send it. And then they'll have a pop up and go like, something like, do you want to have like, what do you want to sign up? Like they try to
Upsell you?
upsell you and all that stuff.
Right.
But you just have to say no and then just do the thing. And they send you a little code. They're like, verify that this is like when you send it, you have to go to your email and grab a little code and stick it in there and then and off it goes. And it's so easy. I mean,
Wow.
I prefer using WeTransfer. And again, I have, Google Drive and I have Dropbox, but this is the way that I like to do it.
I've been using Google Drive. What is it called? Is it Google Drive? What's the one you share within Gmail? It's like, it must be Google Drive, right?
It is Drive. Yeah, it's Google Drive, but they keep changing the names of their.
I don't need
They're
to keep up. I
whatever.
know that every time I send a file, it's bigger than 25 megabytes. It says it's got to share it as like a link or Google something or other.
Yeah.
And then it goes into your Google OneDrive storage or whatever they figure that out. I don't even know. That's what I've been doing to share files between, like what I do when I have a guest come on sometimes, they'll ask for the copy of the audio, and I'll just make them a very simple MP3 version of this conversation here, and I will send it to them that way, and then they have it like a little souvenir, like a, kind of thing for coming on the show. So I do that from time to time. I've been using that. I have a Dropbox account from like years ago. I keep getting the emails from them saying, hey, your Dropbox stopped syncing. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I even had that. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah, totally.
I probably should get rid of that and maybe, I got Dropbox, I think when it was like free or really cheap or something, back in the early days of the Dropbox account. Just like back in the early days of the Google Photos, and it was free. I don't know if it still is. Now I think they dock your Google Drive or something goofy like that, but it used to be totally free for all your photos and video.
It was so nice. And now like they finally, I believe, are not giving you that whatever amount, like an unlimited amount of all the pictures that people were uploading in there. It's obnoxious. So
that's where I used to put all my photos and videos and GoPro videos and all that stuff. So, Elsie, you have a couple of different podcasts. You do work for Libsyn, which is an audio hosting program platform for podcasting, probably one of the biggest ones out there, if not the biggest. When did you first get started in podcasting as a whole?
I started podcasting in July 2006.
Get out of here. You're like from the beginning. You were like at the ground level.
Yeah, I started way back in the day. Oh my God.
How did you guys do it back then? Was it cassette tapes or CDs or?
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I mean, seriously, there's so many things about it that I just remember now feeling like I was such an OG. Oh gosh. There was this little thing that we used to record on, like all of the folks that used to start off recording. Then we all used to use this little MP3 player. I cannot remember the name of it right now, in all honesty. And it was this tiny little, I believe it ended up being it was like a $50 MP3 player. It was shaped like one of those Toblerone. Is that how you say it? Those, that candy with the chocolate that is like a triangle bar. Toblerone, I think.
Sure, I'll go with it. Yes.
Okay, yeah, let's go with that. You're like, what? Yes. So it's like in the shape of a triangle, right? But it was super, like it was maybe 2 inches long. And it had smooth little edges. Oh, I remember now. It's called the iRiver. It was the iRiver.
I think I had one of those.
Did you?
Yeah.
And it was the iRiver. And now I'm like searching it, trying to see like which one I had. But I heard all the other podcasters using this thing, right? So I was just like, oh my God, I have to have this little iRiver thing. And I can still see them. It was the iRiver IFP 799. It's in, I can see that it's in like, what do you call it? In
a museum or what?
It's in eBay. It's on eBay.
eBay.
Classic. It's on eBay, and there's 10 people watching it.
Even if you bought one, could you use it today?
No, I don't think I could, because that's one of the reasons so I wish that I would have had the iRiver. I wish I would have kept the iRiver. I don't know what happened to it. But so anyway, I used to carry it all the time. And the reason I stopped using it, but wait, hold on. Let me back up. So the reason why we were using an MP3 player, right? Because that's so weird, to record our podcasts. And this was on the go, because there was a lot back in the day, a lot of people used to do a lot of like a mobile type recording. And when I say mobile type recording, I mean, there were many times when folks were doing interviews with people that were in real life, like at a restaurant.
Well, that's how I do all my interviews. I mean, thank you for showing up today. I really appreciate it. If I flew you into the studio, I mean, what, you can do it some other way? I don't know.
I know, right? Oh my God, in real life. So people would do that all the time. And so they needed to carry a little recorder. And of course, at that time, getting like a proper fancy recorder was kind of expensive for what you were trying to do, which was like test out this new medium and all this kind of stuff, right? So it was like usually the recorders were the ones that you would record classes at the university, those.
Oh yeah, you put it on, right? on your front desk or on your front, your
Yeah, like those kind of things. But nobody was really recording digitally, and the digital recorders at that time were a lot there were a lot more money, right? And so the MP3 that they had, it had an in and an out to be able to add little lavalier microphones to it that you could actually put
fancy.
in like other kinds of all like fancier sort of microphones and stuff. And so I used to record a yoga class, which is what my podcast was a yoga class. So I used to get this little tiny MP3 player, which was used, remember, it's an MP3 player, so people used to work out with this a lot to put their songs on it and they would go running. And so it came with this little strap for workouts. And so I would attach it to my arm, and then I had a little lavalier microphone that I would stick in it, and then I would attach that to my clothing when I was teaching class, and I would just record, and I would walk around with a little MP3 player on my arm. That's how I recorded. And I stopped using it because I switched to a Mac.
Good on you.
I was on a PC.
Good job.
I know. Ooh. I switched to a Mac, and the driver no longer worked. Remember drivers? Did you deal with the drivers no longer working?
They take me to the store and back, the driver.
Yeah. It doesn't have the driver. What? Anyway, so it essentially became unusable because I could no longer use it anywhere. Like I couldn't. And then I think even with my PC that I had, I believe that it also stopped working. It was one of those things where I could no longer use the thing anyway.
Yeah, it happens. It happens with technology, especially old technology,
Yeah.
And then what do you do with it,
Totally. And then, but now I just wish I had it for like the memories.
Yeah, I get that. I had one of those like flip cameras before cameras were on phones. They had like this thing. It looked about the size of a phone, but had a little tiny screen on it, and you can just record video on it. And you had a bottom port that pulled out with a little tiny USB adapter. You plugged in your computer, and it would transfer the files. And I would bring like my phone, my wallet, my keys, and that other thing, and my regular camera.
Oh my gosh.
When I would go out to like Disneyland or something. But the video quality wasn't that great. But now since phones can pretty much do like everything from video to audio, you're recording, you were just saying you probably could do that today with your iPhone, right?
You can do that with your iPhone. Are you kidding me? There's so many external microphones now that you can just stick to the iPhone, and the transmission of the data. And that was the key of me being unable to use the iRiver as well, is because I could not get the information from the iRiver into my phone, into my computer anymore. Like that transfer was one of the key things. And I think one of the hardest things for earlier podcasters to do in order to get their show done, because a lot of the recorders, right? If you were recording externally, if you were recording onto a piece of hardware that was not the computer, getting those files from wherever you were recording onto the computer so that you could edit it was a feat.
It sounds like hoops, and you jump over all kinds of stuff to get to there. How were you doing editing back then? What was the go-to editor? Was there one or what?
Yeah, it was obviously Audacity was still being that was a thing, obviously back then. And so I did use Audacity for like a hot minute, and I still didn't quite know how to use it appropriately because I didn't understand anything about audio at that time, like at all. So it was like everything was completely foreign to me, like completely foreign. So when I went into Audacity, even I was like, how do I get music on this? Like, how do I make I didn't know these words, but like, how do you duck the voice when the music is rolling in? How do you make that seamlessly sound nice? How is the music not so loud? Like there were so many questions that I had, and I didn't really have anybody that could really talk me through the complexities of everything because I didn't have anybody in front of me doing it. So my first episodes were pretty scary to listen to, even though if I would have just left it alone and didn't want to add music or anything like that, it would have been all good, right? Because everything would have sounded about the same. And
that's the goal, right? Too. I think that's the key with a lot of newer shows that I would listen to. like for some reason, the biggest problem I've heard is just from my own hearing of these shows is that they cannot seem to figure out how to get one person to sound the same level as the next person and, then the next person. If they have more than, so I think if you have a solo show where it's just you by yourself and there's no other elements at all, it probably sounds fine. It's probably hard to kind of screw that up audio wise. But when you bring in another person in and that person's obviously sounding way different than the other person, then you can kind of tell, and it kind of takes you out as a listener anyways, kind of takes you out of the podcast. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of like turned off a little bit by that whole uneven sound. That's why I created this show in the first place, to kind of help those shows figure it out, So, so your podcast, She Podcast, when did you launch that one?
That one started in 2014.
2014. And what was the concept about that show? For those who don't know, what is this kind of the show about?
So, and the She Podcast came about, actually, it built on, there was a Facebook group that my partner at that time, Jessica Kupferman, had started, right? And it was when that Facebook group started, I believe it was called something like Women in Podcasting or something like that. And it started in 2014. And it was a pretty small little group, very small little group. But in the conversations that were happening in the little group, all of a sudden, everybody in there was going like, you know what, we should have a podcast about podcasting that is just for women, and so we were watching these conversations. And I said to Jess, you know what, Jess, we need to start a show before they start a show.
I think there's competition in that, kind of like everybody's going to start a show. It's going to be one big like show off show.
Yeah. No, like I just thought like, this is our group and they all want to be in a show together. So why don't we do it? Right. And so Jess and I started it. And when we first launched She Podcast, the concept was that we were going to talk about podcasting from the women's point of view and sort of do a reporting type, journalistic type show where we would be discussing the news and information and maybe some tips and tricks for podcasters that were very specifically from either the women's point of view and or helping women. That was like,
so trying to get more women into podcasting.
Yes, trying to speak to folks that were really resonating with the type of conversations that we were having in the group, which were unusual to a lot of folks because most of the podcasts about podcasting they were all men, and a lot of them were talking way too much about like hardware, or way too much about business and like internet, business mastery and things like that. And so then like those are all great things to know. I'm not discounting the power of knowing tech and knowing how to make money, because that's a thing. But they were being offered in a way that didn't really work for a lot of us at that time. The advice didn't gel. And so we wanted to make sure that the folks who were starting, especially the women that were starting out, understood they didn't get so overwhelmed with the tech, that they could know that they were capable of doing it, that it's not as crazy sounding as it would feel like and all that stuff. But the show itself has really morphed because what it's now ended up being, because we just finished recording, I believe, episode 370 something.
Wow.
So we're getting up there. And it's because what ended up happening is it became much more of a personality driven show where Jess and I get together and we just talk. And yes, there is for sure absolutely a podcasting slant. I love to talk about tech. I love to talk about the goings on in podcasting. And Jess loves to derail me at every moment that she can.
Well, good for her.
And so it becomes, sometimes I'll have a whole list of show notes and we don't talk about anything, but we do talk about some random something or other that she decided she wanted to talk about. Or we just both derail ourselves and we end up talking about things that have zero meaning to the majority of people other than us.
Well, what now? Has your listeners given you feedback on that? Have they said they like it?
We do. We've often asked feedback about like, what do you want? What do you not want? And it's always almost a hardcore 50-50. 50% just tune in to just listen to us and laugh because I think we're quite entertaining. And the other 50% are constantly looking for more podcasting centric stuff. So we have we're right in the middle and we do both. And so but we are an acquired taste because you're not going to come and listen to our show and get like, here are the 5 tips on how to build your podcast successfully. Like, even if we planned it, we would not be able to get through it because we would end up with, doing a completely different show in the middle of it.
You sound like you're actually having fun doing it.
We have such a good time. And I think ultimately that's really what it is. We have a great time recording the show. If there's no other thing, we have a great time. We laugh, we goof, we mess things up. We are hams. We just have a great time.
That's good. That's good to hear. I love hearing that because I know some people take their show a little too seriously and they get a little too much in their head and they get, I think I have always put fun at the forefront of every show I've ever done, this one, and especially the Chris and Christine show. And we've had guests come on, but we just like to talk about ourselves and our own stuff. Eventually we'll get to the guests. I mean, eventually. So we kind of did the same thing too, where we've asked people what they think, and it's like 50-50, like you said. Some want to hear the guests, some want to hear more of us. So we try to do a balance of both on the show. And I think that when it comes to shows that do exclusive interviews, I think that they should have more of them rather than more of the guests, or at least half and half, maybe. I mean, it's just a thought I had,
I actually had, I do a lot of mentoring, a lot of podcasters, and that is something that, and when folks work with me, I do a pretty serious audit on their work. Like, I invest a lot of my time and attention to their work, right? And part of it is that I do the whole binge listening thing of their podcast because I do feel that I get to know people by doing that. And interestingly enough that you say that, whenever I do work with podcasters that have an interview show, what I end up finding most of the time, especially, I primarily work with a lot of marginalized genders, so leaning more towards non-binary and more women who are in this space. And it's interesting how whenever there is that conversation with a guest and there's a woman that's leading it, and I'm talking from a we perspective here, we tend to take ourselves out a little bit too much and make it about them. And so we focus on the guest a lot more. And my biggest piece of feedback to these podcasters is you gotta, bring yourself out there more. Like, it's your show.
Right. It's not your guest show. It's not your guest show. It's your show. And like, that's why that's advice I always try to give somebody who has a exclusive interview show. And like, I was just telling somebody today through text message, I just said, hey, I'm not, no names here, but I was saying, hey, can I give you some friendly advice? And he's like, well, I'm going to take it, but go ahead. Okay. Two things here. I said, one, all your titles, your episodes are just the name of the guest. Like, that's it. And I'm like, that's not going to get someone to click on play on your episode, just the name alone. You got to give them something else in the title. And secondly, there's no links to anything in any of your show notes ever. Yeah. He just writes a cute little paragraph, such and such, such and such, such and such, but not a link to their book, not a link to their information, not a link to his own website. And I'm like, that's such easy stuff you can do. Like, you would change things so much if you just do the simple thing. It blows my mind that you don't use show notes for links. That's what they're designed for. You know? It's so easy to do that. Do you see that too when you come across people? Do they not do that? Or is that just my own observation?
No, there's a lot of folks that don't quite understand what show notes are and how how a listener behaves and how they take action with you. They are actually, especially for people who are wanting to make money in podcasting, because that's a thing. You have to know when people take action with you. And even if you're not selling anything, even if you're not doing anything at all with your show at this time, you're wanting to aim at somebody listening to your show and going like, oh my gosh, I want to connect in some way. Emailing the show, following you on social, clicking through to a website that you talked about. And how are they going to do that? They're probably going to look at your show notes, and the easier you make it for them to find you, the more they can connect with you, right? So even basic stuff like that is so easy, because as much as we think that they're going to go, follow me on Twitter, head over to, twitter.com/the Elsie Escobar. They may hold that in their heads, but then they're going to start to manually type that. How do you spell Elsie?
Right.
Wait, did
yes.
you say the? Is there what? And then, so anyway, autocorrect, right?
Oh, totally.
So then, if you make it easier and I can just go connect with me, there's all of my links are in the show notes. What is that? Just open up your podcast player, tap on, usually if you tap on the artwork, it kind of turns, it depends. A lot of them have in different places, but they're there. You can click straight through and find what I'm talking about right away. You're teaching your audience to engage with you. And if you're not using that, that's a big tool you could be using.
It's totally free and easy to do too. I discovered that from the early days of the Chris and Christine show. And I probably flood our show notes full of links. Basically, the basic links I put in there is if we have a guest, obviously all of their information, their website, all their social media, because they'll send us all that stuff. I'll put all links to all that in the show notes. Then behind all that stuff, I have a Google Doc that's already pre-rated, done, ready to go. So I can just copy and paste that and stick that right into the bottom of the show notes. And it has our website, our station stuff, our social media stuff, all that junk is in there too. So we have a lot of stuff and everything too. And on this show too, I do the same thing. I'll put all your information in the show notes and stuff, make it very easy. So when someone's listening to the show, they look at their show notes and then they can easily click to the next thing. And I can't believe people leave that stuff. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they just don't know you can do that. Like you can leave a link in there. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people that don't understand a lot of the subtleties. And what I feel is that they don't quite, I don't want to out anybody, but maybe I'm wrong. But it would be really interesting. I mean, you learn all these things from consuming podcasts.
Oh, yeah, right. So
you learn how to use the apps. You learn to see behavior. You observe yourself and what you click through, what interests you, things that get you to download an episode, in the same way that you were just mentioning, that maybe seeing somebody's name without anything else is probably not going to make people test something out, right? I'm cool with using people's names, but I also want to know what it's about.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
At least something that tells me, even if it was Dr. So-and-so who works with puppies. I'd be I want to learn about this person with the puppies, that gives me at least a little bit of context versus just somebody's name.
Yeah. I gave him an example. I said, here's an example. Maybe you can try something like this. Say, how to beat anxiety with Dr. Jones or something.
Yeah, totally. That's great. That's perfect.
Something like that. Cause it kind of gives you it kind of if someone's looking for that, if they Google search anxiety or whatever, that may show up in the Google search or whatever, how the Google thing works. And then they might see, oh, Dr. So-and-so, his doctor, he's obviously talking about it. It's on this podcast. Great. Oh, maybe there's some show notes. And there's a link or whatever to the doctor's, whatever, you can go down the, rabbit hole and find all kinds of great stuff. And I think that it's a very easy way to boost your show, I think,
Yep. Agreed.
Hey, speaking of boosting your show, I just did notice that, I don't know how to take this, but on the Chris and Christine show, we recently had a massive jump in download plays, massive. Mm-hmm. And I know that what's interesting is that they all happened from one place and they all happened from this town, San Diego. So I know that some people say if they have a big jump from outside the country or a big jump, say from a web browser, it's probably promotional stuff or fake robots or whatever kind of thing. What would make, I'm trying to figure this out. It wasn't all one episode. It was kind of spread out over the course of all the episodes, but it was a massive, I'm talking a big, massive jump. The kind of jump that you would see, some shows would get an entire year, kind of a jump. And I'm trying to figure it out. And I couldn't figure it out. Then it kind of disappeared. And then we had another jump yesterday or going on right now with another town within the same county, same thing, jumping to. Now, I don't know if it's real or I'm assuming it's real, but I don't know, I don't know. What do you think on that?
I like to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. One of them is that I do like to see what the audience retention would be within maybe 3 months or more. So instead of thinking about it, oh, look, it's a gem and it's all a jump and it's all through all these episodes, what I would look at is I would just still look at the per episode per month number that you're getting consistently from month to month. So your latest episode within 30 days versus the totality of everything.
Yeah, I do
and
that
then
too, yeah.
I would see if there is an actual addition to audience from that. Meaning, let's say you were getting 100 downloads per episode per month, right? And then you had this huge jump of total, right? Everybody's downloading the thing. And then you keep a tab on it and you still have 100 downloads per episode per month on your latest episode for the next 3 months. Then that would be a sign to me that I'm actually not growing the audience then, because they are not listening to the latest episode. Like, I would need to see a retention in those latest episodes for the course of 3 months as a whole and see where that is, because that's your audience growth that you can really look at. The other thing that I would look at is less about location and more about what devices are being used. So you already mentioned browser-based. I would see if you can be able to discern where like how they're listening to in San Diego. So in San Diego, if the numbers that are listening in San Diego are also listening on Spotify, then I would say that's pretty, like, I would assume that those are people, like those are humans that are pressing a button on Spotify. If it is Apple Podcasts, same thing. Overcast, same thing. But if you start to see something that is more on the browser-based kind of thing, or if like the user agent, you don't know exactly what the heck or where these downloads are coming from because it's not registering anywhere, that would also make me wary, because it would feel to me as if it is something like caching somewhere that is bringing that spike up.
Interesting. This is all fantastic, wonderful data to figure out, because like everybody sees these little spikes or little things here and there, and they get super excited. Everybody gets excited when you see your downloads jump up. You're like, oh wow, check this out. In fact, it actually gave me a little bit of anxiety thinking like, oh my gosh, we're like local celebrities. I thought for a second there when I saw that, I'm like, holy crap, But I think it's wonderful. Now, how important is it really? I know a lot of these new shows really like focus on download numbers, but what is your thoughts on focusing on download numbers and really stressing over it? Like,
I've actually done, like, the only keynote that I've done over at She Podcast Live was all about download numbers and the fact that we tend to focus too much on them because there's really nothing in our lives where one data point in our lives that we can focus on that gives us that we would want to be judged on at all. So if somebody were talking, if you were talking to anything, whether it's about you as a human being or, and any time, like how much money do you make? And if that was the answer that you had to answer all the time, and people would judge you based just on that, it would make you feel a certain way. Same thing if it's like, oh, how much do you weigh? That's a really loaded number right there. Like, can you imagine if all you were sharing on social was your weight number, and that's the only thing people would be judging you on was that number for your health, which is absolutely not okay. Right? Whenever you're judging somebody on health, you think about maybe sometimes weight, height, food intake, how much you work out. Like, there's so many different layers to understanding holistic health for your body. But if you're just relying on that one thing, it's not working. And so that's what we're doing with downloads. You're just talking downloads. It's like saying to somebody, how much do you weigh? And then judging the entire thing based on whether or not you're hitting a specific dream mark, and being able to go like, oh, but I weigh this much. And there's a shame around that. Right. I don't want download shame. I feel that we should all move and look at our entire job or work within podcasting for our own show in a holistic fashion, to take in account so many different layers of the type of work that we're doing. Plus our audiences. You can't compete with some shows out there. There's no way a podcast about podcasting is going to be as big as any other like a true crime show. It's just not going to happen.
Or maybe even a celebrity show that's popular. That's
or
been
a
doing
celebrity. There's no way. And even some celebrity shows can't compete with other celebrity shows. Like, it just, you can't do that. You just can't.
It's very heartbreaking when you say you're a newer show and you hit your first 100 downloads and you're jumping for joy, right? And you post that on social media, and then you see somebody else that just hit 1 million, and it's soul crushing. You're like, oh man, But I always try to congratulate anybody who posts anything about their downloads. I always say congratulations, and help them out and whatever. I always try to cheer them up a little bit, because it's an exciting moment for a new show to hit your first 100 or 1,000 or whatever it may be. It's exciting. We all love that. I think, like you're saying, I think just as important, if maybe not more important, is audience interaction. If anybody reaches out to you personally, oh, I love that episode. Oh, you're great, or this and that, or what, or I learned something, or I took your advice. I love hearing that stuff personally more than any download can ever do. And that, I think that's wonderful stuff. And I think maybe if we focus more on that stuff versus the actual number itself, maybe we all be better in life. I don't know.
No, it's true. And then a lot of the time people go like, how do you get your audience to engage? And like, what's the silliest thing? It's like most of the time when people ask that question, you go listen to their podcast and there's not one way to be able to engage to that show. There's no email
and no
address.
Show notes with links either, I bet.
No show notes with links. I know. Or even just basic stuff. Like, even if you say like, tell us how good the show is, or like, tell us what you think of the show. Don't ask such an open-ended question. That is too much. Like, say something like, did you like this episode? Did you like what Elsie had to say about downloads? Like, that's a more specific ask than tell me how I'm doing.
or leave me a 5-star review. Speaking of the reviews, one thing I can't stand, really pisses me off, is when people say, hey, let's do review swaps. You give me 5, I'll give you 5. Were you planning on listening to the show or not? Because, it's not about listening to the show. It's not like, hey, listen to my show, listen to your show. It's about, just give me a swap. We'll swap each other's reviews just to fluff each other up. I get pissed off when I see that. And when somebody would ask me, hey, let's do a review swap, and I go check out their show on Apple, I go check out their reviews, and they've got like 700 reviews, and they're all 5-star. And I totally call BS on that. Total BS. Because if you look on Amazon, you ever seen a product with 1,000 reviews that were all 5-star? Never. So, but I that's my opinion on reviews. What are your thoughts on reviews?
Yeah, I think that if we have a show that moves somebody to review the show, that's great. And I think once in a while, it's a good reminder for folks just to put it into their, meaning hey, if this was really meaningful to you, go ahead and leave us a review. Wherever, and here's how I would play it. Wherever you listen to your podcast, if there's a possibility, or even just tap those 5 stars, period. Once in a while. But don't make it this incredibly meaningful thing, because truth be told, I don't read reviews from wherever I go do the thing. Like, I never read reviews. I just subscribe to a show when somebody tells me. Like, if somebody's like, yo, you got to listen to this show, I'll go listen to it. Or if I happen to be looking for a specific answer to a problem, I will probably go listen to that show. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is just when I bump into somebody that has done a really good job marketing their show on social, I'm like, oh, I didn't know they had a podcast, or that's really interesting. I want to listen to that. That's how I do it. I don't go, it's weird. I don't think I've ever done that, in all honesty, when I see a new show come out and I see oh, I really need to listen to this podcast. And then I go, wait, I'm not going to download it because I have to go check the reviews.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
do that.
I don't really, the only time I've ever looked at reviews, honestly, is when somebody asked me to give one, and I go look at their reviews and I see they've got like a gazillion of them and they're all 5-star. And I'm like, nah, get out of here with that. If it was maybe a new show with like 1 or 2 reviews, maybe I'll give them 1 or something. But they're just like collecting reviews just to collect them, thinking they're going to boost them in Apple, which really doesn't. So I've been told. So I've been told, hey, speaking of marketing, now let's talk about marketing here. What is the best way to market a podcast? Because I've heard a lot of different angles on how to do it. What would you say to a new show? Like, hey, I want to help market my show, get more listeners. What would you tell them?
Really, for that specifically, it really depends on your audience, because the marketing for a podcast can be almost anything and everything. But I guess so that we start all from the same place, one of the key places that you always have to be on point is with your podcast artwork, your podcast description, your podcast title, and making sure that your show is optimized, meaning that meaning that you've updated your description if that needs to be updated, that you look at the way your show is coming up on podcast apps, right? To see if you can see the image well, read the title of your show. If the description of your podcast gets cut off, in a lot of podcast apps, when you're looking at the directory, see what words show up. Would you click through? Like all of this stuff we can all do. We can all optimize for podcast apps without having to spend any money. And that is actually marketing, because most of the time you're selling from those seconds that people are scrolling through those directories. So optimizing for that is one of the number one ways to do it. The second thing is to see how you show up in different podcast apps. I would say if you're on Android, see if you can find as many podcast apps that that are podcast apps on Android, or Spotify and Apple. Same thing. Go ahead and use an iOS devices, download those apps, look at it, see if they offer opportunities to be featured. That's probably the easiest and most basic way, because that is everybody. Like, it doesn't matter what your audience is. That's everyone. Everyone can do this.
It all starts there anyways, because that's where they're going to listen to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so you want to at first hit the people who are already listening to podcasts, right? That's the easiest way to get an audience, is those that are already listening. Once you've done all of that work, and then you've really tapped out the market when it comes to that, that's when you really have to look at your audience. Like, who are you speaking to? Where do these people hang out? You got to do the work to be able to figure that out, because there are some people who are always on Twitter, right? Like that, those types of people might listen to your podcast just from being on Twitter. There's actually a whole entire other demographic that's on Instagram. That's something to note. That's another bit of information to think about. There's a whole other slew of people that really consume content on YouTube. And there's a lot of folks that really love to read newsletters, internet newsletters and not that are coming down. So you got to think about where your audience is, where the majority of them are, and then go to those places to be seen. I know that there's a lot of talk about podcasting newsletters out there. Right? Everybody talks about how important they are, and you can get featured on newsletters for podcasters and all that kind of stuff.
Like an email blast kind of thing?
Yeah, like the podcast newsletters as a whole. Like, there's so many of them now, where there are a lot of podcast newsletters out there that feature podcasts, not for podcasters, but for consumers. Like, they introduce new shows to people who are listening to podcasts. They're like podcast listening newsletters. There's a ton of these out there.
Now, can you put a player into that?
No. It's just, they just describe, and then there's links, and then you can click one link, like a pod.link type of a thing. So if you get the newsletter and you get 10 shows that are suggested that you listen to this week, you can click through the newsletter, and then you'll go to their pod.link or their Chartable link or whatever. And you can one-click subscribe wherever it is that you listen to your shows. But what I actually feel is really important is if you do have a local newsletter. I know where I live, there is a city newsletter that's really, it's a daily newsletter. Then they put stuff in there all the time, and they always are looking for content. And so even sharing with those local newsletters, sometimes they don't require, they're not like you don't pay them, because they're constantly looking for stuff. So if you can pitch yourself, like, let's say, hey, my show is about gardening, and then you pitch them in December saying, like, people need to start listening to this. This will be a great thing for you to put out in February for, building your garden or something like that. Put it out there, and they can give a link in there, and then you can get local audiences in there. Those are some things that I feel in terms of newsletters, people often don't pay attention to, the local stuff. But you just have to get a really nice angle for your your podcast. Not this one as much, but the other podcast would be so great to be able to share locally. Hey, local podcasters doing this thing, and come and have fun with them and record together and look at what they do. So it would be a nice little story to pitch. It's great, especially in a newsletter format.
That sounds great. Yeah. I mean, so what about the social media angle? Like, for as pitching your podcast, I know people like to pitch it. And I think you were on a show recently where you guys were talking about not promoting your show as much on social media. I think if I've heard that correctly.
Yeah, it really depends on how you're promoting the show on social and whether or not people are seeing it, because you have to understand that social media is more like the storefront, right? That's what social media is. It's about making sure the outside of the store looks really great so that when people walk by, they're like, ooh, I got to remember to go back there, or, oh my gosh, right? So they're like, you're just getting it pretty to get people to walk in the door. That's what social is, right? Okay. And so you have to be very specific about how you're going to do that. And so sometimes a little too much of nothing doesn't do the work, but very key things putting out outside of your storefront can bring people through the door, right? There are I'm sure you have walked into stores sometimes where you're like, you're never going to walk into that store, but they do something outside the store that draws your attention.
Usually it's like 50% off today only, or something like that.
Yeah, no, but it does. Like, sometimes when you're like, it brings your attention, right? So that's kind of what social does sometimes. And sometimes, how do you do that on social? Through images, through sounds, through interesting, funny tweets or funny posts, through running contests, through asking right questions, because part of what you're doing is you're calling attention, right? And whether or not, you're doing the 50% off, and sometimes you walk in and it's 50% off all the way in the back, and it's like underwear. And you're like, oh, well, this was lame. But sometimes you walk in and you're like, oh my God, this is the best deal ever. So you have to also gauge, what you don't want is your marketing also to become so good that people walk through and your podcast is not as good as your marketing, because then you're going to lose them. Yeah. You're going to lose them. So you're going to get them through the door, and then they're not going to stay. So you got to balance all that stuff out.
What are your thoughts on audiograms? Because I do audiograms and I love them. I think they're easy to do. They're fun. What are your thoughts on them?
I like audiograms as well. I think that they're very, they're great as a storefront thing. They call attention and all of the fun things. They can be really powerful to introduce people to your show, or to just test things out and be creative. What I have not and have not seen, and I keep on asking, is I haven't seen direct reflection of audiograms to audience growth.
Well, I do think it's much easier. If I'm scrolling through social media, it's much easier to click on a 1-minute clip than subscribe to an hour-long show.
Yes, absolutely.
So I've noticed, for me personally, the numbers are much, much bigger on the audiogram versus the downloads to the physical show. So I always say, if you're going to do an audiogram, I say put your best stuff in that audiogram from that episode, the very best stuff. Well, I want to save the best stuff for the show. No, put the best stuff there, because they might not make it to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key thing there too, is that it needs to be for its own sake, because once you put your best stuff on there and people consume, let's say 10 of your audiograms, or they're constantly being exposed to what you're putting out there, they have more of a probability of them clicking through to be able to listen to your show than not, right? Because they're already
aware of
know
you, right? They're already aware of what you're doing, and they've heard you, they've seen you, they already know your face or your audio or your image for whatever it is. They already hear that. So it's already in their head. But I've heard some really bad audiograms too, where like I had to crank the phone up and it sounded like you were in a cave or something like that. I'm like, that's your best stuff. That's your best stuff. You know, like, but you know, I mean, everybody does their show how they want to do it. Not everyone knows all the stuff that I've learned and you've learned, you know, over the years doing this and stuff. And you're starting out. So what advice would you give somebody that's like brand new getting into podcasting today?
Oh my goodness. I think one of the key things for you to really learn everything and continue doing your stuff and being successful is that you enjoy it. You enjoy podcasting, because if you take that out, podcasting is hard, dude. It's like, it's not the easiest thing.
What?
And so,
I like to make it look easy. That's what I do.
I know. It is much harder than you think it's going to be. You think you're just going to do these things, and there are a lot of little bits attached to it. That's just with the production aspect of it. Then you have to promote it. I'm not trying to dissuade people from doing it, because I've been doing it now for 16 years. So it's part of what I love to do, but I'd also know how important the fact that I love it, it's kept me doing it, because I enjoy it so much. And also the other thing is, you got to pick the right podcast for you. And I say that because my first show was a solo show, which I did really well. But mind you, I didn't have the life that I have now. And I stopped recording that show because it really was me, and I was doing everything, and my life changed. And I just simply felt like it was a little too much. And I took a hiatus for like maybe about a year or so from podcasting. And then I started another show, and then I started another show. But those two shows are co-hosted. And I was able to, before I got into them, go, okay, I have support with this one by doing this, and I have support with this one by doing this. I didn't have to do them by myself. And for me, I find podcasting success with a co-host. That's just me. Right? I love that format, and it keeps me podcasting. I attempted to launch a fourth show, which it was going to be, it's just me. It's out. It's a Spanish show that I put together, and I had really big dreams around what the concept of the show was. And I had all kinds of ideas, and I did 2 episodes and I stopped. And it was not because I didn't want to do it. It was too much to do it on my own. And I realized I couldn't. I don't have the luxury of doing that anymore. And then I had 2 other shows. It's just way too many things. So I had to say, wow, this is hard. So I'm telling you, make sure that you do the show that you enjoy and that you feel you can keep going with, because it's a lot.
It is a lot. I know. And I think that, like, I originally started podcasting thinking like I could never do this as a solo show. It'd have to be like a co-host. That's why I asked Christine, hey, you want to have a podcast? Let's do a podcast. It'll be fun. She's like, I don't know. Come on, it'll be fun. Let's try this. We'll just try it out and we'll just play with it and see. It was fun. And then people started to like it. So I said, well, maybe we're onto something. And we both enjoyed it at the time. But I know that doing a solo show is much harder, I think, than doing a co-host show, because the co-host show, you kind of bounce off each other and like, talk and chit chat and kind of like, oh, how's your day? Or what are you doing? Or what do you think of that? And it can go back and forth. I think it's why probably like when people who do solo shows, they tend to lean towards interviews because I think interviews are fairly easy. But that's just me. That's just my perspective. I know some people take it very seriously. Well, I got to read the book about the guest, and I got to do all the stuff, and I got to have like a whole list of questions and show notes and all this stuff. But you can also just have a conversation with the person on the other end, and that sort of thing. So that's what I try to do. But I know when I do a solo show, I try to imagine I'm talking to a listener just on the other side over here, just talking to them straight to their face, as if I would talk to a person in real life. But that's how I do it. So it works for me, and I also don't read a lot of show notes, because if I did, I would screw them up, so I just try to I'll have maybe an outline, what rough outline, meaning like I know what I'm going to talk about, So I'm just going to talk about it. And if I don't like it, what I do is I'll go back in the recording and I'll like cut it out and take two, I guess, so to speak, and keep going. It's only when I do a solo show. But that's what's worked for me. I know everybody has their own ways of doing the thing. There's a billion different ways to podcast that you could do, that people do. I think find the one that works for you and you can consistently repeat every week or every other week and keep it going. So, but yeah. So Elsie, this has been so fantastic having you on the show today. Really, really appreciate this.
Yay.
So Elsie,
you bet.
Oh, well, Elsie, where can everybody find out all about you and all your wonderful stuff?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, you can head over to, like, I'm on Twitter. I think that's the place where I hang the most. And just hit that link in that bio. So twitter.com/the Elsie Escobar. And it's got all my links there, or on Instagram as well, if you want to hit that link right at the top. And you can find all the things that I'm doing and all the places that I'm helping out and creating content.
Changing the world, Elsie. You're doing fantastic work. You're doing the Lord's work over there. I love it so much. Well, thank you so much for stopping by today. I appreciate it.
You bet.